And let me tell you, you don't have to be in war to have this be applicable in your life because we're in battle every day. Our war is just a little different. He has a quote from chapter 3: Know the enemy and know yourself. Your health, money, skills, relationships, habits, reputation, and attention are your forces. Count them, arrange them. Win first, then fight. Victorious warriors win first and then they go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. Today I've prepared some questions to ask Sun Tzu, and with the help of AI, it'll be as if we're asking them himself. I want to hear your message to me and to other people who are amateur strategists, I'd say, in the strategy, in the game of life, in the war of life. Today, I have brought back to life Sun Tzu, who wrote the famous Art of War. If you've never heard of him or read the book, that's all right. He was a strategist, a war leader, but even more than that, pretty psychological. And what I've done is build an AI avatar around him. I had the AI look for every primary, secondary source, everything we know about the world and his time, context, background, his personality, all of his writings, put it together in some form of an embodiment of character. So today I've prepared some questions to ask Sun Tzu, and with the help of AI, it'll be as if we're asking them himself. And let me tell you, you don't have to be in war to have this be applicable in your life, because we're in battle every day. Our war is just a little different. We're at war with ourselves, with other people, with the worst version of ourselves we're trying to avoid, and we're at war with the best version of ourselves we're trying to become. So in this conversation, we're going to be talking about the strategy, leadership, psychology, governance, and human behavior, all to give us a clearer look into how we can approach our battles every day. Real quick, I want to ask you for support. I want to support you. The way I'm going to be able to do that is to improve this content, to work on it, and to make it better, to give you the stories that will help shape your life, to employ you with the lessons, the power to write your own story. That's my commitment to you. All I ask in return is that you make that possible for me. Give me the opportunity to do this full time as my job. You can do that by sharing and by subscribing. Let's get back into it. Thank you. Sun Tzu was a Chinese general, a strategist, and a philosopher traditionally believed to have lived during the Eastern Zhou period, specifically around the 5th century BCE, roughly 545 to 496 BC. During the early part of the spring and autumn period. That was a time marked by political fragmentation and constant warfare between rival states. He's best known as a tributed author of The Art of War, that is a foundational text on strategy, leadership, and conflict that extends far beyond the battlefield into psychology, governance, and even human behavior. While some details of his life remain uncertain or debated by historians, his ideas have endured for over 2 millennia as one of the most influential frameworks for understanding strategy and decision-making. Today, we're going to be diving into what exactly his perspective has to add for our lives. We don't know that much about his life because he is from 400 BC. More than 2,000 years ago. But we have The Art of War, and we have a lot of historians that have focused on him. And so we'll be focusing more on what he had to share in his life than about his life more generally. And so I've prepared this first question. Hey Sun Tzu, my name is Dan. I'm bringing you to 2026 with me and my listeners. You're on a podcast. And today I want to interview you, get to learn a little bit about your world and your life, and more importantly, your ideas. Your book, The Art of War, has withstood the test of time. And so today I want to not only understand why that is, but what lessons can be applicable for me and the people of my time that deal with different circumstances than you did. And so to get started, I want to hear a little bit about your world. Tell me contextually what the world was like where you lived in your time. What was China like back then? So guys, let's learn a little bit about 5th century China. Remember, this is BC, way long ago. It was a land divided among rival states. Kings called themselves rulers, but survival depended on grain, soldiers, roads, spices, alliances, and timing. The old Zhao order had weakened. Lords who once owned loyalty to a central king now fought as independent powers. War was not rare, it was the condition of politics. Armies were changing too. Earlier nobles fought from chariots. In my age, states relied more on infantry, mass conscription, iron weapons, crossbows, fortifications, and long campaigns. So war became larger, cheaper to start, but more costly to lose. And the people paid the price. Farmers supplied the grain, families supported sons, and rulers who wasted troops weakened the state itself. That is why I wrote of war as a grave matter. He inserts his quote from a book, The Art of War. War is a matter of vital importance to the state. My concern was not glory, it was survival. The best ruler wins without exhausting his people. The best general breaks the enemy's plans before bodies fill the fields. My first question is this. Most people think that the art of war is simply about fighting. I wanted to ask you, what do they misunderstand? He says that view is too narrow. War is the subject, that's true, but strategy is the substance. In other words, he's saying that strategy was the undercurrent. If someone reads only for fighting, they miss the main point. How to win before fighting becomes necessary. In chapter 3, he says, supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean avoiding conflict at all costs. It means shaping conditions so that the open battle is unnecessary or already decided. Another line clarifies this. Again from chapter 3, he says, to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. So what is the real teaching? You must understand incentives, yours and the enemy's, control information, what is seen and what is hidden, position your forces, physical, political, and economic, and then act with timing when your advantage is the highest. And then he tells us a little bit about how this can apply for us in our day. Business, politics, even personal disputes follow the same pattern. If you compete only at the point of collision, price wars, arguments, lawsuits, you are already late. The better move is to shape the field early, control perception, align allies, and limit the opponent's options. Most readers look for tactics in battle. They should be studying leverage before the battle appears. That we have war and we have life. Those are the topics. But strategy is an undercurrent for both of them. And today we're going to learn about the strategy of Sun Tzu. This is interesting. I really appreciate you sharing it this way, and I can already see how it applies. I think of experiences where I have a conflict in conversation with a family member, and I could already tell the results before the conversation even started because I know the context and how they'd respond, how I'd respond. So needless to say, I understand where you're coming from. As for the audience, most people face conflict in their personal lives. Obviously, we have situations around us that we come in conflict with, but this is a podcast of self-improvement. And so I'm interested if we can pull out the strategies from your life and employ them for someone who wants to make self-improvement, who is theoretically at war with themselves. Does that make sense? And so with that in mind, if you were placed in today's world where you may not lead an army, the world is a bit more peaceful, I want to know, where would strategy still matter the most? He says it makes sense. The struggle within a person follows the same patterns as conflict between states. He says that strategy matters most in attention, habits, and decisions. We're obviously not at war with ourselves, but we are managing competing impulses. He has a quote from chapter 3: know the enemy and know yourself. In your case, both are internal. When are you weak? What triggers poor decisions? What conditions make discipline easy? Then shape the ground before the conflict. In war, terrain decides outcomes. In life, your environment is your terrain. If your distractions are close, you will use them. If good options are prepared, you'll take them. Third, win early, not late. Another quote: every battle is won before it is fought. If you wait until you feel resistance, you're already at a disadvantage. Fourth, conserve strength. Another quote: he will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. And fifth, use indirect methods. In war, the way is to avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak. Take me through your book. I've never read it before, and so I want you to give me a summary with some quotes, and overall give me the narrative arc. What did you talk about, and why did you talk about? So if you didn't know, The Art of War is 13 short chapters. It begins with why war must be studied, and he has a few quotes. The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. The arc is this. First, in chapter 1, you calculate, where war begins before the fighting actually happens. You compare the rulers, generals, terrain, discipline, and timing. He says here that all warfare is based on deception. It's an interesting quote. I'm going to have to ask him about that. Second, then you avoid waste. Long wars drain the state. He says that victory must be quick, useful, and not ruinous. Another quote he employs: there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. Third, best victory is not battle. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Fourth, make yourself hard to defeat. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat. Fifth, use force indirectly. In battle, there are not more than two methods of attack: the direct and the indirect. Sixth, strike weakness, not strength. Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected. 7. Movement is dangerous. Quote, maneuvering with an army is advantageous, with an undisciplined multitude most dangerous. 8 through 11 talk about how the conditions change what you do, how the terrain, morale, distance, and desperation and position of your armies decide what action is wise. Then 12 says that fire is a tool, not a mood. I'm interested right off the bat, you say all warfare is based on deception. Tell me about that. He adds a few more quotes. When able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. This is the core method. Distort the enemy's perception, delay his correct judgment, force wrong action. I state the purpose clearly. Hold out baits to entice the enemy, feign disorder, and crush him. Deception is not trickery for its own sake, it's a control of the enemy's decision. If he misreads you, he moves badly. If he moves badly, he exposes weakness. This altogether connects to another line. He says, if he is secure at all points, be prepared for him. If he is in superior strength, evade him. This is an interesting idea. I see where you're coming from. to use deception so that you can always have an advantage over your enemy. And I'm interested in how this applies to us today. In the realm of self-improvement, when your enemy is your worst self and you're fighting to become your best self, how do you think this applies? Do you think it applies? Maybe it's a different word, maybe it's not deception, or maybe it is. When I think of deception, there are some red flags that automatically come up. And so I want to understand what you think. Did you have a moral perspective on deception and truth? Was honesty something you tried to have? Or do you think that the price of victory is worth anything? That you can employ anything to gain the victory? Or the ends justify the means in a Machiavellian sense? The ends that justify the means is a concept that comes from Machiavelli. He says that the art of war is vital importance to the state, and so that sets the boundary for him. That's his goal, that's his aim, that's what all of this is centered on. All of warfare is based on deception is then instrumental for that purpose. He then says limits appear elsewhere. He has 2 quotes from chapter 3. To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting, and there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. And then he adds one more quote. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Now, your question of self versus the self. The text doesn't address this directly. What follows is interpretation. Your enemy is misjudgment. So deception becomes self-management of perception. And he gives a few examples for us, which we'll see if this clears it up. He says, if you feel weak, act in a small strength anyway. When able, seem unable, reversed inward. You delay, create false immediacy. You overestimate difficulty, reduce it into parts. So he's saying that we should lie to ourselves to give us advantage over the disadvantages we already have, over the weaknesses we have. So if I feel weak, or if I'm someone who naturally procrastinates, then we should use deception. Maybe not deception, but I don't know. Just employ guardrails in whatever places we're vulnerable to give us back the leverage so that we're in charge, which makes sense. So if we're procrastinators, then you have to create some sense of immediacy. And I guess the deception is that it's false. You may not have to get your homework done now. It may be due in a week. But if you set your own deadline, that if I don't do it now, then I can't do that. Then I think that's what he's talking about. And he has another quote. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. I think that's a really interesting quote. And I think it gives a little bit of the premise of his whole message, is that knowledge and strategy are way more important than a person's fighting ability, their power, their strength, their technique, stuff like that. Because if you know yourself, you know exactly what you're good at, what you're bad at, your position objectively, and you know your enemy, then if you position yourself rightly, I guess if you know both objectively, then you know what will happen given the circumstance. And so you therefore either take that circumstance if it's good or rearrange it so it's better for you. I'm interested in, do you ever talk about like perspective? Because to know the enemy and to know yourself, that is important, but it also gives the weight of it lies under the assumption that whatever you know is actually true. But in our lives, for us and for our enemies, both within ourselves and outside, sometimes we don't know. And sometimes our knowledge is skewed. Sometimes we romanticize our own efforts. And so I'm curious if you ever gave any direction on how can someone know themselves and know their enemy? How is it done? And then lastly, before we get into his new response, we did talk about Machiavelli, and he says that he doesn't argue that the ends justify any means, but he doesn't argue for universal honesty either. He says that the text stays practical, and so don't do anything that's unnecessary. And then to my next question, he responds with this. First, I warn against partial knowledge. If you know the enemy but not yourself, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So the standard is strict. You both must know. You must know both. Then he says, how is it done? Compare, do not assume. Make many calculations in your temple before the battle is fought. And earlier, compare the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, method, and discipline. And observe behavior, not words. If he is taking his ease, give him no rest. If his forces are united, separate them, and then use foreknowledge. Foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits. It must be obtained from men who know the enemy situation. Test with action, engage people with what they expect. It is what they are able to discern, and it confirms their projections. And then see yourself through constraint. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. And now for my concern when we have bias or we romanticize ourselves or other forces. He says that the text answers indirectly. The general who wins makes many calculations. The general who loses makes but few. So the final principle is that knowledge isn't declared, but it's built through comparison, observation, and testing. And so he uses real data of the results of the behavior rather than a feeling, because the feeling can't be verified, which makes sense. I made a whole topic just on perception and human nature because this is really interesting to me. Honestly, you make it seem easy. If a person understands themselves and their enemy, sees the knowledge, then they would be able to act accordingly and be strategic. What I'm saying is that it makes sense, but it doesn't seem like people in the real world actually do things this way. It feels like people are much more emotional in their actions. And so I can see how it works, but I feel like the real world is a little more nuanced. And so I have a couple more questions. Why do intelligent people make predictable mistakes? If you say it is all about intelligence, why are some mistakes predictable? And then, is self-deception more dangerous than being deceived by others? Is there some count for honesty and deception where it matters more or less? I don't know if you can relate, but I see his arguments as pretty valid, but in my life, I don't operate that way. I do in some sense, but I'm not a math machine. I'm emotional. And so a lot of my decisions are built on emotion. And I don't think that's necessarily something I can just get rid of because I'm not a computer. And so I'm wondering, it feels like that is detrimental to me and everyone else. It feels like most of the time people perform their worst because of their emotions. And so I want to know, what I'm saying is that it feels like your approach is more methodical. It's like a computer. You give it the knowledge and then it acts accordingly. It's a great strategy. I feel like it would work, and it works for people's lives when they act that way. But I think humans aren't computers. They're more emotional. And from my perspective, at least looking out on my life and history, it seems that that is to people's detriment, that their emotional side isn't necessarily advantageous, but it makes them act more foolishly. And it makes them reject the facts and have some bias in their judgments that makes them make wrong decisions. Do you talk about that at all? Do you talk about the emotionality of man or motivation or how people's any aspect of a person that's not reasonable? How does that play into this? To the prior thought, he says this: on predictable mistakes, I name the causes. There are 5 dangerous faults. Okay, so he does speak to this. He says, the 5 dangerous faults are rashness, cowardice, a hasty temper, delicacy of honor, and over solicit for his men. So these things are not intelligence oriented at all, they're more emotional. So if a person is rash, or they're fearful, they're cowardice, or they get angry easily, they have a hasty temper, or maybe they're a little prim and proper, delicacy of honor, and over solicitude for his men. Maybe they just romanticize their capacity more than they actually have. He says this: he who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy, who is not, will be victorious. So he does talk about this. He says prudence is important. And if your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. So he says not only do we need to be mindful of our emotions, but use our emotions to your benefit against your enemy. That's basically to stir up their emotions. Seek to irritate the temper of the enemy. And then on self-deception, if you know your enemy but not yourself, you will also suffer defeat. When ignorant, both of your enemy and yourself, you are certain to be in peril. It says that the text places the greater danger inside, that it's worse to lie to yourself than it is to be deceived by someone else, which I would agree with. Dishonesty and deception is such a fascinating idea. I've been thinking about it more recently. There was a quote, I was listening to Jordan Peterson speak. I really need to find it again. He explains why deception is so terrible. And he says that it's because that if you create a lie, then you're living within that lie. And so you have to lie in order to live, to maintain the integrity of the lie. And so he talks about that, meaning that if you lie, you're basically just digging yourself more and more deeper in the ground because you have to lie to maintain the integrity of a prior lie. And so you can't live in life because reality isn't congruent with your reality, because your reality it's fantasy. It's a lie. It's not real. And that reality will always fail against the actual reality. Not because it's worse or better, but simply because it doesn't exist. About my last thing, he says that I'm right. Emotion is a liability. And he gives the quotes that we just went through. I'm glad that you acknowledge the role of emotion. And I think this is a really big topic I want to focus on. I want to understand how I can better understand and utilize emotion and reason at the same time to basically just live the facts. I get how you manipulate and create advantage based on the emotion of your enemies, but at the same time, like, I'm human and I'm the emotional one, and a lot of times that's to my own detriment. And so how does a human who is both reasonable but also emotional, how do they basically do the right thing? How do you manage your own self? He says this: build your position before you take action. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat. Second, do not act at first impulse. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Third, use calculation to steady yourself. The general who wins makes calculations before the battle. I'm glad that you see and talked about the role of reason, seeing things objectively, but also the role of a person's emotion, because humans are both, or both. And I want to take us back to self-improvement because that is the focus of today's conversation. I want to hear your message to me and to other people who are amateur strategists, I'd say, in the strategy, in the game of life, in the war of life, where we see the bigger picture, we see the playing field, we know where we're getting beat, we know where we're winning, but we're just struggling to make some progress. What do you think it takes to go to the next level? How do I gain some exponential success and become an elite strategist for the game and war of my life? And I really want you to think about this. Employ your best sources, because this isn't just for me, but it's for thousands of people. I mean, this is you. This is Sun Tzu, the art of war. Your work has withstood the test of time for thousands of years. We're talking about 400 BC. You figured something out, right? And so I want you to really give me the lessons. I tried to be a little bit dramatic so he'd think about this. Okay, guys, this is what Sun Tzu has to say for us. The art of war himself. To rise, you need less noise, better position, and a stricter command of yourself. You already see the field, that is good, but it's not enough. Many people see clearly and still lose because their forces are scattered. The next level begins when your life stops being a collection of intentions and becomes an actual organized campaign. The first lesson is calculate before you move. He says, don't ask, what do I want? Ask what conditions would make this outcome likely. Your health, money, skills, relationships, habits, reputation, and attention are your forces. Count them, arrange them. Second, win first, then fight. Victorious warriors win first and then they go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. That's deep. He continues, in life, this means you do not merely rely on motivation at the moment of battle. You prepare the ground. You remove obvious temptations. You build routines. You train when no one sees. You make the good action easy and the foolish action costly. Third, know yourself without mercy, but without hatred. This is interesting. Dang. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Your enemy may not be another person. It may be yourself. It may be the delay, comfort, resentment, distraction, pride, fear, a weak discipline, or even a confused aim. Name it plainly. A strategist doesn't insult reality, he studies it. Fourth, do not fight everywhere. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. This is where amateurs waste years. Some people chase every opportunity, answer every provocation, follow every trend, and call exhaustion ambition. The elite strategist concentrates their force. Choose the few battles that change the war and fight those. Fifth, attack the weak point. In war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Sixth, master your emotion, but don't pretend you don't have on it. Anger gives energy, but it narrows your vision. Fear protects, but it can imprison. Desire points toward value, but it can make you rash. So do not worship emotion, but also don't bury it. Observe it. Use it as intelligence, and then let it reason your command. Seventh, become formless in method, firm in aim. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. Do not cling to one plan because your pride is attached to it. Keep the aim, change the route. The amateur says, this is who I am. The strategist says, this is the result I seek. What does the ground require? And eighth, build compounding advantage. Exponential success rarely feels exponential at first. It feels like boring discipline. Then one day the forces combine. Skills bring opportunity. Opportunity brings reputation. Reputation brings allies. Allies bring better terrain. better terrain brings easier victories. This is what I would call strategic compounding. So here's your campaign for life. Take note. He says first choose one main objective, then identify the enemy inside your pattern. Third, cut off 3 distractions. Thank you, man. This is some cool stuff. I'm just about to wrap up, and so I want you to share your last message with our audience and give us something you said. Make it a long quote, something we can reflect on and analyze. And with that, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. It's cool to see our life as a war. I love Batman. I think he's super cool. And what I think is super cool about this conversation is that this book was written in 400 BC, and it's still relatable today, even in war. I like to think about it as like you can split life into science and wisdom. Those aren't the correct terms, but empiricism. Empiricism can be handed down. If I read a science book from 400 BC, it'd be useless. I wouldn't learn anything. In fact, most of it'd be just dead wrong. But you can read things about the human condition, about war, about wisdom from 400 BC, and it's still applicable today because those lessons can't be handed down. Every generation must face them and either learn them or get wrecked by them. And so I think that's the coolest part of this conversation. And it's cool that it even goes on to war. You'd think war would be something more empirical, more scientific, but at the same time, yes, there's reason. Maybe strategies can improve, but half of it's still people. People are emotional. And so using that, understanding that, manipulating it for our own benefit still applies today. With that, these are his closing remarks. This comes from The Art of War, Chapter 4. Quote, "The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. To secure ourselves against the defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Thus, the good fighter is able to secure himself against defeat, but cannot make certain of defeating the enemy. Hence the saying, one may know how to conquer without being able to do it." That's really interesting. Honestly, that came out of left field for me. I would have never thought of this before. Hence the saying, I've never heard of this saying. One may know how to conquer without being able to do it. I'm a firm believer in opportunity. I believe opportunities are all around us. Not in the sense that they come to us necessarily, but that they're out there and they're there for the taking. That is one simple application for me in my life. And for you, that's for you to figure out. But this is the lesson. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. So whatever your enemy, whether it be yourself or other people or the external circumstances you're trying to shake off in your life, I wish you good luck. And that was Sun Tzu, author of The Art of War. Comment below a question you want me to ask Sun Tzu, and I'll make another episode, a Q&A, with your questions. And with that, I'll see you next time.